Hi, and welcome back to It's Not Rocket Science 5 Questions Over Coffee. Delighted this afternoon to be joined by Len Bruskiewitz. I'm going to get that wrong, aren't I, Len? But
That
I'm
was
going to
that
go
was a
with that
pretty
one
good run. Pretty good run at it.
Len is a business coach and he's a certified exit planning advisor. And this is a conversation I'm really interested in having because so many business owners don't think about their exit nearly early enough in their business life. You start a business and then you suddenly realize there's a crisis in life or there's a time to think about retirement. And then you ask the question, well, how long is it going to take me to get out of this business? And it's nearly always longer than you think. You need to start thinking about this much earlier in your business life. So I think this is going to be a really excellent conversation. I'm really delighted Len has made a few minutes in his day to join us to have this discussion. So welcome to It's Not Rocket Science, 5 Questions Over Coffee, Len.
Great, thank you, Stuart. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to sharing some information with your viewers and listeners.
So I may have sort of started already to sort of tee you up on who the person is that you help, but let's just fully understand exactly sort of what the business owner is that you help, how you sort of how they should be identifying themselves.
Yeah, you absolutely hit it. If I think about who my ideal client is, it's a business owner, probably $1 to $15 million in revenue, and the the challenge that they're facing is what you hit upon. About 60% of business owners don't have any kind of written exit plan. And
Mm,
that's a big challenge because, as you said, once a traumatic event happens, a death, divorce, disability, it's too late. Uh,
mm,
and it's also too late when you say, I want to be out of this business in a year, right? It's too late. You need some time, right? Um, and so that's the biggest challenge I see, right? But if you think about when I start working with a client, the biggest challenge that I have is helping them get independence from their business, right? You know, if it's the case where every decision runs through them, everything to run the business is up in their head, nobody else can do anything. Uh, that ends up leading to a company that's worth next to nothing, unfortunately. So that's the biggest challenge once I start working with somebody is to get them to back away from the day to day and you know let make the company saleable.
yes, interesting, Len. You've used a couple of real key terms because I deal with businesses who are sort of really scaling, and they have the same image. They have the same problems. You have a founder who's there making every decision, and you cannot scale a business if the only person in the business that can make a decision is the founder. And when they go on holiday, they don't make a decision. In fact, so many of them don't even bother to go on holiday because they know it's a problem. So you've just started me into the sort of the second bit of this discussion, which is so, what are the things they've tried to do themselves before they sort of suddenly come across somebody like you that sort of changes all of that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things they think they do or make an
I
effort
like
at.
that phrase.
One of the first ones is they think they've communicated well to
uh,
their family,
yeah.
to their employees, and in essence, they haven't. Right? I'll just use an example of some data around succession. Right? So the
Mm,
idea of a older generation with the idea to pass along the business to the younger generation. Data says that about 50% of the uh, older generation think that the younger generation is going to take over. In reality, that only happens about 25% of the time. So you've got a big gap there. And what does that do to? It's because the two parties haven't communicated well enough. And it's the same to employees, right? Of am I going to sell this business? Am I going to sell it to you, the employees or the management? So communication is definitely one of the biggest things that they do. The other is just waiting too long. You've hinted at it before. Um, you know, they know they need to document everything that's going on in their business, but it's just easier because I know it in my head. I'll just do it, and then something happens, and it's really can be a pretty traumatic experience. The final thing is that uh, they try things, but they don't have any kind of sounding board, right? Running a business is pretty lonely, and
mm,
they just don't have the background and what it takes to get a business ready, because for most business owners, this is their one and only time that they are transitioning out of a business. So they just don't know what they need to do. And there's certain steps you need to take. And so that's a big piece of what they think they've tried, but haven't really done all that well.
Len, you hit upon something very interesting there, which is documentation. And once again, in my work, I spend an awful lot of my time working with people with documentation and systems to automate things, largely because, once again, it makes a business scalable, but it also ensures these businesses don't run into those repeated errors, which so often cause business valuations to crash. But I read, and I don't know whether or not this is your experience, but a business is often 2 to 3 times more valuable if it's just got simple documentation which tells other people how to run the business, so that somebody else can step in and start running it fairly immediately without having to go through the pain of trying to work out how on earth everything works around here.
I completely agree with that data. And if you think about the things, if you think about the other side, what absolutely crushes the value of a company, it's that lack of independence, lack of documentation, and bad accounting, right? Those three
Mm-hmm.
things are the killers. But I agree with you. Documentation feels like such an important thing for many reasons. Exit aside, just making the business run better. But there isn't that rigor. I think it's always I mean to do this, but the status quo is just easier to maintain.
And it's true, isn't it, that you find yourself fighting fires everywhere, and then when somebody turns around and says we should write down what happens, it's, well, we're never going to get into that problem again, so why should we? So it becomes just one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. So you know, I think this is a human problem, right? I mean, everybody deals with this in their personal life, in their business life. It's hard to take the time, even though, the data will tell you that 5 minutes here is going to save you, 50 minutes down the road, or 500 minutes, whatever the multiple is.
Brilliant, brilliant. Len, now this is where we get to the really valuable thing for people who are watching or listening or coming back to this recording, and that is, I think you have got a very valuable piece of free advice that you can have, and I think I've put on screen here the place where you go in order to get that piece of free advice. It's greaterheightscoaching.com. That's greaterheightscoaching.com. That'll be in the notes, but tell us, what will we find at greaterheightscoaching.com?
Well, that's my personal website. So you'll find a fair bit of information about the exit planning process, about some of the options that are out there for people. But what I really like everybody to check out is I've got a free business valuation calculator. There's a link up at the top right of the site. It takes about 15 minutes. And what it does is gives you a basic idea of what your business is worth today. That's based on your industry, your location, your revenue, and your profits today. And then it asks you a set of questions that really get to how ready is your business. And so what it does is it comes out with a valuation of what your business is worth today. And then based on your answers to those kind of readiness questions, it gives you an idea of how much more value is missing, and the
Mm.
basic areas that you need to work on in order to close that gap between what your business is worth today and what it really could be. So it's not going to answer every question for you, but in 15 minutes, it gives you a pretty good feel for what the areas are that you could really improve upon to increase the value. Should you get to that point where you want to turn around and sell your business down the road?
Great piece of work, and I sincerely hope people go and take advantage of it, because knowing the first step to knowing where you have to go is having some sort of map, and a simple document like that, which just points out where things are missing, is the first step to a really good map.
Yeah, and it's simple. Like I said, this isn't a challenging thing. It's 15 minutes, and you get some really great feedback there.
Brilliant. So, Len, what was it in your past history? What was it that sort of brought you to this? Was there a particular experience or a program, a book, which sort of started you thinking about how do businesses or business owners exit from their business as well?
Yeah, I think I'm going to bring up 2 points, not to cheat on the question here. The first was an experience. I started out doing kind of generic business coaching, right? I was helping small business owners. And one of my first clients was a 72-year-old woman who had run her business with her husband for over 50 years. And he unfortunately passed away. And as much as she was involved in the business, she really didn't have a good feel for what was going to happen to it. You know, she's 72. She said, "Hey, I need a plan here." So when we first started talking, she said, "Len, I can't sleep at night because I don't know what's going to happen to my business." We sat down, we worked through options, we came up with a plan. She's implementing that plan now, and she said, "Len, I can sleep at night now." So to
Excellent.
me, that was a huge, kind of. I think I found my why. So that was the first event, and then the piece of literature around that was a book by Michael Gerber called The E-Myth Revisited, which I think is just an unbelievable way. He does a great job of laying out why most businesses aren't successful. And the hint is we've already talked about it. The business owner is too much in the business, in the weeds of running everything and not stepping back and looking at the big picture. But to me, that book is really excellent at laying out the things that that a business owner needs to do, and that's really keep innovating, document everything. Have we talked about that before? And really understand what your metrics and business drivers are. Those are kind of the
Mhm.
3 key pieces to take you from you know a single business to something that can scale.
I love it. Okay, we've had a really interesting discussion, but I sense there is a question that you think I should have asked, which I haven't asked yet. This is my get away from it and not do too much work on these things question. So then there's a question that you're thinking I should have asked by now. So come on, tell me, what is the question you want me to ask? And then obviously you know the answer to the question that you've just posed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are watching this, listening to it, are saying, "Well, how does the business get valued?" So I think that's the question I would like you to ask me, and let me take a run at it. So this is really, it's a bit of a loaded question because businesses are valued depending on a number of factors. So one of the factors is, ultimately who the buyer is. So there are buyers that are going to ultimately pay less for a business. That might be your children, right? Or your
Mm-hmm.
employees. Or it may be somebody who just wants to kind of come in and run the business. They're going to probably pay a little bit higher. The highest value payers are those who this business is strategic to them. So they can take what you're
Yes.
doing and leverage it with what they're doing, right? Maybe it's an opportunity for them to sell additional things, your product to their customers or their product to your customers, whatever. So that usually yields the highest value. So that's a big it depends answer on who the buyer is. But I want to go one level below that and say, how is value driven, regardless of who the
Oh, great
buyer is?
question. Great
Yeah,
question.
yeah. And so this is one that I think will surprise some people. Only about 20% of the value of a company are the things that you can see externally. So what's the status of the market? What's the company's kind of position within that market? Only about 20% of the value is driven that way. Fully 80% of the value of a company is driven by what are called the intangibles, right? And these are I think about this in 4 big categories, right? So we call them the 4 C's. They're different kinds of capital. The first one is the structural capital. So are your processes documented? Do you have metrics in place that you understand, right? So that's one big piece. And again, that translates really well to somebody else who wants to buy the business. The second one is the customer capital. So do you have recurring revenue? Is all of your revenue dependent on 1 or 2 customers? That's a huge risk if it is, right? So,
Yes.
how dependable is your future revenue? How dispersed is it amongst different customers? That's customer capital. The third one is social. This is really what's the culture of your company? Is there owner independence or not, right? And the final one is the human capital. So, Do you have a great team? Is there some know-how within your company that nobody else has? That again, if you do, that's a huge value adder. If you don't, that doesn't add a ton of value. So I think about those intangible things that are built into your company that are only visible from the inside, really, and that's what drives the vast majority of the value in a business.
Do you know, it's interesting. You've made two comments in the last couple of minutes, which I think is not well enough understood. And maybe I'll just expand that to three, having said that, Len. But the power of one is something which I worry about a lot with businesses. They are often dependent upon one business, one customer, one supplier, one route to market. I was in a position like that with one of my businesses where I had one very large customer, and when they cancelled that contract, you can imagine the devastation that had upon the business. It meant basically restarting from scratch, trying to build a customer base. We had relied upon this customer for a very, very long time, and they just seemed to be reliable until eventually it was one day, yeah, we're cancelling. We're no longer needing 35, 40, 50%. I think it was something like 75% of my workforce. We're all dedicated to this one customer. That can be a huge risk, but it's equally, one person in your business who knows everything. That can be the founder, but it can also be one key person that's been there from day one. And you're there thinking to yourself, oh, Joe's always been hugely reliable. They're never going to leave. And then they do. And everything suddenly falls apart. So the power of one is hugely important. And the other thing that I think you just basically alluded to, which I think is really important, you need to keep innovating. If you haven't got a team that are empowered and ready to innovate, you're stymieing your own growth and causing yourself more issues than you can think of.
I completely agree. And what's important to realize is that these are all daily things, right? This isn't something you do in an annual planning process. These are things you have to live every day. And not to steal too much thunder from my valuation calculator, but some of the things you just brought up are questions. Are you innovating? Are you getting ideas throughout your organization? Are you reliant on only one or two customers? And I think this also gets back, Stuart, to that timeline we talked about early on, right? So if you're trying to innovate and if you're trying to diversify your customer base, you can't do that in 30 days, right? So my timeline when I talk to clients is, a minimum of 2 years, and it's really 3 to 5 years before your business is ready. And then once it's ready, now it's maintenance mode. But the reason I say that is if in many transactions, it just once you agree to sell your company, it's 9 months to a year before that
Yeah,
deal
that's
happens.
the killer. Yeah.
Right. So if you take 1 year, okay, that's a year out. Now you've got to get ready. If you've got, some accounting maybe that's not so pleasant, that takes another couple of years to work its way through. Documenting all your processes, right? Leveraging, figuring out what you're really good at and going for that. It all takes time. So, can you sell a company in less than 3 to 5 years? Yes, you can, but it's probably not going to be for the value that you want because some of these things just have to happen and they take time.
And I think you've hit upon a couple of good things as well, Len, which is, doing these things means that when somebody knocks on the door, that strategic customer that sort of, you've been working with, that says, you could be a really key part of my organization, I'd like to buy you. If you then turn around, it's a bit like, I've got an opportunity. I now need to put together the document, the sales document. If it's not there ready to go, you spend the next, I don't know how long, putting together your sales document, and then the opportunity is gone. So be ready every time by putting these processes, these thinking, this stuff in place from day one.
Exactly right. You hit upon the exact example I give. Somebody walks in the door, and it does happen. Somebody walks in the door and says, "Hey, I want to buy this business." If you say, "Hang on, come back in 18 months when I'm ready," they're not coming back. So.
Yeah, agreed. Len, it's been absolutely brilliant having this conversation with you. We could obviously talk far too long and probably would if we didn't bring it to a halt and bore quite a lot of people. But I think the important thing is we've left them with just enough information to think to themselves, I think I better go and have a look at greaterheightscoaching.com and see what the valuation of my business could be. And I'm also going to put in a plug for my own newsletter, where I talk about the sort of brilliant people like Len who are coming up on this podcast in a few days. Normally it comes out on a Tuesday morning about that Tuesday's guest. And if you want to go to link.thecompleteapproach.co.uk/newsletter, link.thecompleteapproach.co.uk/newsletter, you can get that newsletter delivered to your inbox on just twice a week, once with the who's coming up, and you can immediately get on and ask questions of people like Len when they're here live, and then also hear them when we replay them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other usual pod places. Len, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us. Really appreciate the effort that you put in. And I think if people haven't by now realized selling your business is not going to happen in the next 5 minutes, you really have to prepare and think about it in the most strategic way, then they've not been listening properly. So I thank you for coming on and tell us about it.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.